From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Special counsel Robert Hur takes a beating from the left and right on Capitol Hill concerning his report on why he did not bring charges against President Biden for mishandling classified documents. What's the political fallout of this decision and the hearing for the presidential campaign? Plus, Joe Biden says he frowns on the proposed purchase of U.S. steel by Nippon Steel of Japan, a rare intervention that could be a slap to an ally if the deal is in fact blocked. What are the merits of the steel deal? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal Opinion pages here on our daily podcast, Potomac Watch, and I'm here with Bill McGurn and Alicia Finley, two of my colleagues. Let's start with the Hur hearing. Bill, you listened to it and have written about it. The Democrats, of course, hit him for commenting in his report on President Biden's faulty memory, and the Republicans hit him for not indicting Joe Biden. Here's how the special counsel, who was appointed, remember, by Merrick Garland, specifically to investigate Joe Biden, defended himself on Capitol Hill.
My assessment in the report about the relevance of the president's memory was necessary and accurate and fair. Most importantly, what I wrote is what I believe the evidence shows and what I expect jurors would perceive and believe. I did not sanitize my explanation, nor did I disparage the president unfairly. I explained to the Attorney General my decision and the reasons for it. That's what I was required to do.
He's right. He was required to write a report. That's what the Justice Department special counsel regulations call for. Write it to the Attorney General. Then the Attorney General can make a decision about whether to release it. Merrick Garland decided to release it. In my view, a smart decision, since it undoubtedly would have leaked, and he would have been accused of somehow covering something up. But what's your judgment about how Robert Hur handled himself?
I think he handled himself very well. Remember about a month ago when the report was released, made public, the Democrats really went after him, accusing him of being a political hack, a tool of MAGA, and so forth. They were mad because he pointed to Joe Biden's big weakness going into the 24 campaign, which is his mind, his mental acuity. And they all attacked him for that rather than focusing on what should have been for them the substantive good. He's not bringing criminal charges, and he made some distinctions between Joe Biden's case and Donald Trump's, and they really blasted him for that. I think yesterday, though they still attacked him for that, they'll never forgive him for bringing up Joe Biden's memory. Though they attacked him for that, they tried to make it into a trial of Donald Trump. I think they recognize the whole thing had backfired them. Remember, Joe Biden called an impromptu press conference that night to prove that he's all mentally there. And then he made more lapses and came across as really cranky and angry and lost. So I think they kind of learned the lesson from the last time.
Well, they may have learned the lesson. That doesn't mean they weren't willing to bash her around. But one of the things, I think, a point that's important to make, and this is really just a factual observation, which is that once a prosecutor in Hur's position makes a decision to prosecute or not, that is, he's a special counsel, he's obliged to explain that decision to the Attorney General. And once he decided, as he did based on the evidence, he said he did, his report did, that the president had willfully retained documents, and willfully retaining means in violation of federal law that says you can't do that with classified information. He had to say, okay, well, I say willfully retained, so why didn't I prosecute? And that's when he got into the explanation, Alicia, that it was a matter of he didn't think a jury would convict because he thought they would conclude that the president's memory was faulty enough that he couldn't, at some basic sense, be held responsible for that. Now, there was also the matter that he wasn't going to indict a sitting president anyway, which would have contravened Justice Department rules. But he said, even if that weren't the case, I would not have brought the charges for the reasons of memory and ability to get a conviction before a jury.
Right. So prosecutors have a lot of discretion in which cases and charges they bring. And this is in part a matter of prudence. In order to actually get a jury conviction in criminal charges, you need to prove a scienter or mens rea, that somebody actually acted with intent. He believed, based on the transcript and the evidence, that President Biden willingly retained the documents, and there was a recording of Biden with his ghostwriter mentioning that he knew that these were classified documents.
I just found the classified documents,
exactly.
as he said.
But the issue is, if you would presumably be asked to testify in a trial, and given his faulty memory, which was eminently observable during the interview, and again in the press conference a little later, that maybe they wouldn't actually find him all that credible. And, the defense might actually argue that, well, Biden, he's a little old, he might not have remembered, and this would have made it less likely that a jury would convict.
And a prosecutor has to keep that in mind. I mean, you don't just prosecute somebody to punish them. You prosecute them because you think you will actually get a conviction. And that's one thing you have to consider. Bill, another element of this, though, from the Democratic side, was they tried to tarnish Robert Hur as a partisan. Let's listen to Congressman Hank Johnson of Georgia.
You are a Republican, though, aren't you?
I am a registered Republican.
Yes, sir. And you're doing everything you can do to get President Trump reelected so that you can get appointed as a federal judge or perhaps to another position in the Department of Justice. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, I have no such aspirations, I can assure you, and I can tell you that partisan politics had no place whatsoever in my work. It had no place in the investigative steps that I took. It had no place in the decision that I made, and it had no place in a single word of my report.
Bill, Hank Johnson demonstrating again that he is such a class act as a member of Congress, just sheer hackery, impugning Hur's motives when, in fact, there's no evidence to impugn his motives other than the fact that he is a registered Republican, which I guess is, in Johnson's eyes, an offense. The thing that puzzles me here is why Democrats didn't cheer more and say, hey, look, he wasn't indicted. Trump is, and focus on that point.
Well, they did a little. I mean, half the time they spent trying to make the hearing a trial about what Donald Trump did. I think that what you played, that was the cheapest shot of the day, but there are plenty of others. Jamie Raskin is saying we're inviting fascism in. Someone accused him, as though it was a crime, of being a member of the Federalist Society, which he said he was not.
The Federalist Society, the group of originalist conservative lawyers.
I think it just shows the weakness of the case. One of the things Hur made clear is that Joe Biden has almost half a century record of taking documents that he shouldn't have classified and keeping them at home in different locations, 6 locations. So it didn't go well for them. So I think they tried to just smear the messenger for that. Hank Johnson was undoubtedly the cheapest. That was the slimiest moment of the hearings.
So another point that Hur made in his report was the contrast with his decision on Joe Biden versus the indictment that has been made by the other special counsel, Jack Smith, against Donald Trump for his mishandling of classified documents. And that case is ongoing. It hasn't gone to trial. We don't even know when that trial will be, if there will be one. Trump is going to be in court for a hearing in his case, pleading 2 grounds: Presidential Records Act. He says he has the right to retain those documents, and then an abuse of the Espionage Act with which he has been charged, trying to get the case dismissed. Alicia, we still don't know how Judge Aileen Cannon is going to rule.
Right. So I think the more serious charge in that case is really the obstruction charge, that he basically wasn't really the crime, it was the cover-up. And we don't really know how the judge is going to rule, and the Trump has tried to dismiss it under the argument that I find it a somewhat compelling argument that the special counsel wasn't constitutionally appointed. He's a private citizen. He did not go through Senate confirmation and the advice and consent, but it would be under the Constitution an officer of the United States.
That he must be.
Must be, right.
That means Senate confirmed.
Exactly.
That's a controversial argument.
It is. And I think they're going to make it. And if they don't get a ruling down at the district court level, I think they will actually try to appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court may end up hearing this case too.
And if that's the case, probably push that past the election. Bill, but the issue of a double standard between the way Trump has been indicted for his handling of documents, Biden was not indicted, did come to the fore in the Robert Hur hearing, particularly from the Republicans, who basically accused her of carrying water. Some of them did for Biden in this instance. And I guess Hur fell back at his answer and said, look, the difference is the obstruction charge, as Alicia pointed out. It was that Trump didn't cooperate and withheld documents even after he was asked by a subpoena.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Although I think the critics have a good point. That's true. And Trump should be charged with obstruction. But for the underlying crime of retaining classified documents, so forth, it doesn't quite explain why you wouldn't charge Biden with that, because they established a clear record. And of course, he said the only reason he's not bringing charges is that he probably couldn't persuade a jury. So I think there's somewhat a case, but politically, I think all these distinctions are going to get blurred. I think to a lot of Trump supporters, they're going to see Joe Biden not charged, Donald Trump charged. They're going to watch the behavior of the Democrats at the hearing. I think it may help Donald Trump. It may help him more that Joe Biden isn't being charged than if he were.